8 comedians Johnny Carson knew were actually evil in real life. For 30 years, Johnny Carson welcomed America's funniest people into our living rooms. His warm laugh and easy manner created an atmosphere where comedians felt comfortable enough to let their guard down. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the audience went home, Carson often saw a very different side of comedy's biggest names. Johnny had a photographic memory for cruelty, revealed a former Tonight Show producer who worked alongside Carson for over a decade. He could watch a comedian charm millions on camera, then turn around and scream at a production assistant seconds later, and he never forgot it. According to those closest to Carson, the legendary host maintained a mental blacklist of comedians whose public personas were radically different from their private behavior. Stars who portrayed themselves as lovable, charitable, or wholesome on screen, but who Carson knew to be cruel, abusive, or morally bankrupt behind the scenes. Tonight, we reveal the 8 comedians Johnny Carson privately considered to be genuinely awful human beings. Stars whose dark private lives and vicious treatment of others stood in stark contrast to their carefully crafted public images.
And opens Friday, March the 24th. Would you welcome Jerry Lewis?
One, Jerry Lewis, the humanitarian with a heart of stone. Jerry Lewis built his career playing lovable goofs and childlike characters. His annual muscular dystrophy telethons raised millions for charity, creating an image of Lewis as a deeply caring humanitarian devoted to helping children. According to Carson's private observations, nothing could have been further from the truth. Jerry Lewis was probably number 1 on Johnny's list of comedians he couldn't stand, revealed a former Tonight Show producer. Not because of professional rivalry, but because Johnny saw how Lewis treated people when the cameras weren't rolling, and it disgusted him. Lewis's appearances on The Tonight Show were notorious among staff members for the tension they created. According to multiple accounts, Lewis would arrive with an entourage of sycophants, make impossible demands, and berate crew members for the slightest perceived misstep. He was arrogant, abusive to staff, and particularly cruel to women, recalled a former stage manager. He'd smile and charm the audience, then turn around and scream at a female production assistant for bringing him the wrong brand of water. The contrast was jarring. One incident in particular reportedly cemented Lewis's place on Carson's mental blacklist. During a commercial break in the mid-1970s, a young female intern accidentally entered Lewis's dressing room with a message. According to multiple witnesses, Lewis unleashed a tirade so vicious that the young woman quit television altogether. Johnny heard about it and was livid, said a former cameraman. He made sure that intern got a personal apology from the executive producer, but he never forgot how Lewis had treated her. Beyond his behavior on set, Lewis's personal life revealed further contradictions. Despite his public image as a champion for children with disabilities, he allegedly abandoned his own daughter and refused to acknowledge her throughout his life. And while he teared up on camera during his famous telethons, off-camera he reportedly mocked the very children he claimed to be helping. He smiled for muscular dystrophy and screamed at interns 5 minutes later, remembered a longtime NBC employee. Johnny found that kind of two-faced behavior reprehensible. As Carson might have wryly observed, Jerry could make you laugh unless you worked for him. Then he just made you cry.
Oh, funniest monologue I've ever heard. Heard you many, many years. Yeah. Tonight was the funniest, so enjoy it.
2. Don Rickles. When the insult comic wasn't joking. Don Rickles built his entire career on insult comedy, a brash, take-no-prisoners style that earned him the nickname Mr. Warmth, ironically, and made him one of the most distinctive comedic voices of his generation. Audiences loved his act, laughing along as he skewered celebrities, politicians, and ordinary people alike. According to those close to Carson, the troubling reality was that Rickles' caustic stage persona wasn't an act at all. It was his genuine personality, unleashed without the mitigating factor of humor when cameras weren't rolling. Rickles was known for being funny on stage, and vicious off it, explained a former Tonight Show booker. Johnny found him professionally hilarious, but personally insufferable. He feuded with writers, mocked staff, and humiliated guests behind the scenes. Unlike many comedians who developed outrageous personas for the stage, but were actually kind and gentle in private life, Rickles reportedly never turned off his aggressive, insulting approach. He simply removed the punchlines when dealing with people he considered beneath him. Insult comedy only works when it's an act. For Don, it was just personality, revealed a former writer who worked with both Carson and Rickles. What made it worse was that when he insulted celebrities on camera, they were in on the joke and could respond. When he went after staff members backstage, they couldn't defend themselves without risking their jobs. Carson, who maintained a professional relationship with Rickles and frequently featured him on The Tonight Show, privately expressed concern about the comedian's inability or unwillingness to distinguish between performance and real life. According to those in Carson's inner circle, he found it disturbing that Rickles seemed incapable of normal human interaction without demeaning others. Johnny used to say, "Don doesn't have a switch, he just has different targets," recalled a former producer. He thought it revealed something fundamentally broken in Rickles' personality, that he couldn't relate to people without attacking them. The contrast between Rickles' popularity with audiences and his treatment of colleagues created a moral dilemma for Carson. While he recognized Rickles' undeniable talent, he reportedly found it difficult to reconcile the comedian's public success with his private behavior. As Carson might have dryly observed, he never turned it off. He just turned it on you.
You and Earl Butz are going to do it again, huh?
Isn't he beautiful, Earl Butz?
Yeah.
They're fitting him for a lightning rod now.
3. Bob Hope, America's beloved comedian with dark secrets. Bob Hope embodied wholesome American comedy for decades. His USO tour's entertaining troops made him a national icon, and his clean-cut image as a patriotic family man endeared him to generations of fans. According to Carson's private observations, that image concealed a much darker reality. Hope's public and private personas couldn't have been more different, said a former Tonight Show staff member. Johnny respected Hope's work with the troops enormously. That part was genuine, but he knew that behind the scenes, Hope was cold, calculating, and lived a double life that would have shocked his fans. The most striking contrast between Hope's public image and private reality involved his marriage. While presenting himself as a devoted husband to his wife Dolores, Hope allegedly engaged in affairs with countless women throughout his long career, including showgirls, actresses, and assistants who worked for him. He entertained the troops and betrayed his family, noted a former NBC executive who claimed knowledge of Hope's extramarital activities. Johnny found that hypocrisy particularly distasteful, the gap between Hope's family-friendly image and his actual behavior. Beyond his personal infidelities, Carson reportedly found Hope's backstage demeanor troubling. Unlike his warm, joking public persona, the private Hope was described as cold, politically calculating, and ruthlessly focused on maintaining his position in the entertainment industry, regardless of who got hurt along the way. Bob Hope understood power better than comedy toward the end, observed a former writer who worked with both men. Johnny felt Hope had become more interested in collecting honors, maintaining political connections, and building his legacy than in actually being funny or kind. What particularly disturbed Carson, according to those close to him, was Hope's tendency to use his substantial political connections to advance his career and protect himself from criticism. Hope cultivated relationships with presidents from both parties and allegedly leveraged these connections to maintain his prominence long after his comedy had ceased to resonate with younger audiences. Johnny believed comedians should be outsiders who speak truth to power, explained a former producer. He was uncomfortable with how Hope had essentially become part of the establishment, using his political friendships to shield himself from the very kind of criticism comedians are supposed to deliver. As Carson might have observed with his characteristic dry wit, Hope brought laughs to war zones and heartbreak to hotel rooms.
Johnny, it's so good to see you. I really mean it.
Thank you, Milton.
And I want to thank you for that marvelous introduction.
I meant it.
It's exactly the way I wrote it.
4. Milton Berle, television's first star with a monstrous ego. Milton Berle, known as Uncle Milty and Mr. Television, was America's first TV superstar. His variety show in the late 1940s and early 1950s was so popular that movie theaters and restaurants would close on Tuesday nights because everyone was home watching Berle. According to Carson's private observations, Berle's massive success created an ego that made him one of the most difficult personalities in show business. Berle had a massive ego, was notorious for backstage bullying, and was rumored to physically intimidate younger comics, revealed a former Tonight Show talent coordinator. Johnny found his behavior appalling, especially his need to always be the center of attention, even at other performers' expense. Berle's reputation for stealing jokes from other comedians was legendary in the industry. According to numerous accounts, he would attend other comedians' performances, write down their best material, and then use it himself without attribution or permission. This practice earned him the nickname, the Thief of Bad Gags, among his peers. Johnny valued originality above almost everything else in comedy, explained a former head writer. He found Burl's joke-stealing not just unprofessional, but almost sacrilegious, a fundamental violation of what it meant to be a comedian. Beyond his professional transgressions, Burl was infamous for his crude behavior and sexual boasting. He was obsessed with his alleged anatomical endowment, frequently making inappropriate comments and even, according to industry rumors, physically exposing himself to prove his claims. He didn't just tell dirty jokes, he lived them, said a longtime NBC employee. Johnny thought it showed a profound lack of class and respect for others, especially women. What particularly troubled Carson about Burl was how he used his power and status to bully those who couldn't fight back. According to multiple accounts, Burl would verbally abuse writers, stagehands, and other support staff, creating a toxic environment wherever he worked. Burl came up in vaudeville, where the star was king, noted a former producer. Johnny came up in the more collaborative world of television. He thought Burl's treatment of crew members and support staff was inexcusable, regardless of how talented or successful he might be. As Carson might have quipped with his characteristic raised eyebrow, you didn't shake his hand. You just braced for impact.
I had the fake ID, Doreen Norton. Yeah? I used her ID.
5. Rosie O'Donnell, the Queen of Nice with a hidden mean streak. Though she rose to fame after Carson's era, Rosie O'Donnell earned a place on the extended list of comedians whose public and private personas were dramatically different. According to those who remained in Carson's circle after his retirement, he took note of O'Donnell's reputation for being friendly on camera, but infamous for raging backstage. Carson was fascinated by O'Donnell's Queen of Nice persona, said a former Tonight Show staffer who remained close to Carson in his later years. Here was someone building a brand on kindness and relatability, who was reportedly making producers quit in tears behind the scenes. It was exactly the kind of phoniness that always set Johnny's teeth on edge. O'Donnell's daytime talk show, which ran from 1996 to 2002, presented her as warm, funny, and approachable, a stark contrast to her alleged backstage behavior. Multiple reports from staff members described screaming fits, unreasonable demands, and vicious treatment of everyone from executives to assistants. She made America laugh, then made producers quit, claimed a television director who worked with O'Donnell. The contrast between her public warmth and private rage was exactly the sort of thing Johnny found most disturbing in entertainers. O'Donnell's public feuds with co-hosts during her tenure on The View and her explosive conflicts with various celebrities eventually cracked the Queen of Nice facade, revealing to the public what industry insiders had reportedly known for years. According to those who remained in Carson's circle, he viewed this as inevitable, believing that the true nature of performers eventually reveals itself, no matter how carefully crafted their public image might be. Johnny used to say, "The camera doesn't lie, at least not forever," recalled a former NBC executive. He thought performers like O'Donnell might fool the public temporarily, but that authenticity, or lack thereof, would eventually become apparent to everyone. What particularly troubled Carson about figures like O'Donnell was how they leveraged causes like charitable work or advocacy to enhance their public image while allegedly treating their own employees with contempt. This disconnect between public messaging and private behavior represented to Carson a fundamental dishonesty that undermined the comedian's most essential asset, credibility. As Carson might have observed with his characteristic deadpan delivery, the only thing louder than her jokes was the sound of people walking off set.
Oh, I thought she was adorable.
Yeah.
Anyway, how's your wife? Which one? I said it before you did.
6. Lucille Ball, the comedy icon with an iron fist. Lucille Ball created one of television's most beloved characters as the scatterbrained, lovable Lucy Ricardo on I Love Lucy. Her physical comedy and precise timing made her an icon, and her groundbreaking role as the first woman to head a major television studio cemented her place in entertainment history. According to Carson's private observations, Ball's trailblazing success came with a darker side that few fans ever glimpsed. She was beloved publicly, but iron-fisted privately, revealed a former NBC executive who had worked with both Carson and Ball. Johnny admired her talent and business acumen enormously, but he was troubled by how she wielded her power, especially toward writers and creative staff. As the head of Desilu Productions, Ball allegedly ruled with absolute authority and often harsh judgment. According to numerous accounts, she would fire staff over minor issues, control the studio with what many described as brutal coldness, and engage in bitter feuds with writers who dared to challenge her creative decisions. Funny on screen, fierce, sharp, and terrifying behind the scenes, recalled a veteran television producer. Johnny thought her treatment of creative staff revealed a fundamental insecurity, a fear that without total control her success might somehow slip away. Unlike some comedians on Carson's mental list who were simply mean-spirited or abusive, Ball's difficulties stemmed more from her perfectionism and determination to succeed in a male-dominated industry. Carson reportedly recognized that Ball had faced extraordinary challenges as a woman in power during television's early days, which perhaps explained, if not excused, some of her more dictatorial tendencies. Johnny had complicated feelings about Lucy, explained a former Tonight Show writer. He respected her immensely as a performer and pioneering executive, but he was disturbed by stories of how she'd eviscerate writers or fire crew members over relatively minor issues. He thought great talent didn't justify treating people poorly. What particularly troubled Carson about Ball was the stark contrast between her warm, approachable screen persona and her reputation as one of Hollywood's most intimidating executives. According to those close to Carson, he viewed this disconnect as a form of deception that ultimately undermined the authentic connection with audiences that he considered sacred in entertainment. As Carson might have observed with his characteristic subtlety, she didn't just break the mold, she broke everyone who questioned it.
And he looked at me and says, "Well, young fella, I've been playing golf man and boy for 34 years to get money for booze and broad."
7. Buddy Hackett, the wild man with no boundaries. Buddy Hackett built his career as a lovably crude comedian whose chubby face and rubbery expressions endeared him to audiences despite his often risque material. His appearances on The Tonight Show were guaranteed to push boundaries and leave Carson in stitches, at least on camera. According to those close to Carson, the host's private opinion of Hackett was far less positive. Hackett was wild, vulgar, and aggressively mean when cameras weren't rolling, said a former Tonight Show booker. Johnny appreciated his talent and found him professionally hilarious, but he was deeply uncomfortable with how Hackett treated women and subordinates when he thought no one important was watching. According to multiple accounts, Hackett's boorish behavior went far beyond his on-stage persona. He allegedly groped female staff members, made demeaning comments about their appearance, and created uncomfortable situations that many women on the Tonight Show crew came to dread. He didn't tell jokes, he tested limits, recalled a former NBC page who claimed to have witnessed Hackett's behavior firsthand. Johnny was from a different generation, but he had clear boundaries about treating staff with basic respect. Hackett crossed those lines repeatedly. What particularly disturbed Carson about Hackett was his apparent inability to distinguish between his ribald stage act and appropriate real-world behavior. While Carson enjoyed blue humor in the right context, he reportedly found Hackett's tendency to treat every interaction as an opportunity for boundary-crossing comedy deeply troubling. Multiple guests claimed he groped, insulted, and threatened them, said a former producer. Johnny had to smooth things over more than once after Hackett had offended someone backstage or at an industry event. He found it exhausting and ultimately inexcusable. Unlike some comedians who simply had occasional bad moments, Hackett's inappropriate behavior was reportedly consistent and deliberate, a pattern that Carson found reflected a fundamental character flaw rather than isolated lapses in judgment. According to those in Carson's inner circle, he viewed Hackett as someone who used comedy as a shield to excuse behavior that would be considered unacceptable in any other context. As Carson might have noted with his characteristic raised eyebrow, you didn't sit next to Buddy at a party. You ducked.
It wasn't a big hit, was it?
No, because they took it off about 2 days before it went out.
8. Bill Cosby, the beloved TV dad with a monstrous secret. The most disturbing name on Carson's list, and the one that has been most thoroughly validated by subsequent events, was Bill Cosby. Long before Cosby's crimes became public knowledge, Carson allegedly harbored deep concerns about America's dad based on troubling patterns of behavior and persistent industry rumors. Johnny allegedly banned Cosby from the show during one stretch, never explained why, revealed a former Tonight Show staffer. Looking back, it's clear Johnny knew or suspected something serious long before the public did. Cosby crafted one of the most wholesome public images in entertainment history. From his clean comedy albums to his groundbreaking role on I Spy, to his iconic performance as Dr. Cliff Huxtable on The Cosby Show, he presented himself as the ultimate family-friendly entertainer. Behind this carefully constructed facade, however, lurked something far darker. He played America's dad, but behind closed doors, he was the monster under the bed, said a former NBC executive who claimed knowledge of early complaints against Cosby that were suppressed by network management. Johnny heard things. Hollywood is a small community, and word gets around. He never spoke publicly about it, but his private actions spoke volumes. According to those close to Carson, the late-night host became increasingly uncomfortable with Cosby's presence on his show during the 1980s. While the precise reasons were never explicitly stated, Carson allegedly instructed his bookers to reduce Cosby's appearances and eventually stopped featuring him altogether for a period. This decision was particularly significant given Cosby's immense popularity during this era. The Cosby Show dominated television ratings, making its star one of the most bankable guests in television. Carson's willingness to forego the ratings boost Cosby would have provided suggests his concerns were serious indeed. Johnny was careful never to make public accusations, explained a former producer. That wasn't his style, and without concrete evidence, it would have been both legally problematic and potentially career-ending. But he found ways to distance himself from people he didn't trust, and Cosby definitely fell into that category. Decades later, when dozens of women came forward with allegations against Cosby that eventually led to criminal charges, many who had worked with Carson noted that he appeared to have sensed something was seriously wrong long before the public reckoning began. As Carson might have observed with somber clarity, he wore a sweater, but he left a cold trail. Why comedy sometimes breeds monsters. The 8 comedians on Carson's mental blacklist shared a common thread, a profound disconnect between their public persona and private behavior. This pattern raises a troubling question. Is there something about comedy itself that enables or even encourages such disconnects? Johnny had a theory about this, revealed his former head writer. He believed that great comedy requires a certain distance from normal human emotion, an ability to see the absurdity in everything, including pain and suffering. Some comedians develop this as a professional skill. Others, he thought, had it because something was fundamentally broken in their emotional makeup. According to those close to Carson, he observed that many successful comedians came from troubled backgrounds, experiences of abuse, neglect, or social rejection that gave them both a unique perspective on human behavior and, in some cases, deep-seated issues with empathy and emotional regulation. Johnny used to say, "Comedy comes from pain," recalled a former producer. He understood that many great comedians developed their skills as a defense mechanism, a way to deflect bullies, win approval, or make sense of difficult experiences. The problem comes when that defense mechanism becomes so ingrained that the person can't connect normally with others. Carson himself was known for keeping emotional distance in his personal relationships, a trait that contributed to his multiple divorces and somewhat remote parenting style. The difference, according to those who knew him well, was that Carson recognized this tendency in himself and worked to compensate for it, particularly in professional contexts where he maintained high standards of courtesy and respect regardless of his personal feelings. Johnny knew his own flaws, explained a longtime associate, but he also knew the difference between being emotionally reserved and being actively cruel or exploitative. The comedians who troubled him most were those who used their fame, wealth, or status to mistreat others without consequences. Another factor Carson identified in the worst-behaved comedians was the corrosive effect of unchecked power and adulation. Stars like Lewis, Burl, and later Cosby achieved such massive success that they became surrounded by enablers who shielded them from normal social consequences and feedback. Johnny believed that audience laughter was like a drug, said a former writer. Some comedians became addicted to approval and grew increasingly desperate and bitter when they weren't receiving it. The need for that validation warped their personality over time, making them unable to function in situations where they weren't the center of attention. For Carson, the saddest cases were comedians like Lucille Ball, whose undeniable talent and groundbreaking achievements were tarnished by behavior that reflected deep insecurity despite enormous success. He reportedly viewed such cases as cautionary tales about the psychological toll of fame and the importance of maintaining perspective about one's place in the entertainment ecosystem. Johnny never forgot that his job was making people laugh, noted his former executive producer, not changing the world, not building monuments to himself, just bringing a few moments of joy into people's living rooms. That humility protected him from the worst effects of fame that he saw destroy others.